Support for Connect the Bay and its community outreach initiative has been provided by the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, the North Bay Leadership Council, and with support from Renaissance Journalism.
Good evening and welcome to Connect the Bay from Northern California Public Media. I'm your host, Steve Mencher. We're coming to you from two locations today. I'm here in our KRCB studios in Rohnert Park, and we have a crowd watching and contributing from the San Jose studios of Create TV. That's about 30 miles south of our San Mateo station, KPJK. You may also be seeing us on the NorCal Public Media Facebook page or website. And if you need to take a drive or go on a jog, take along the KRCB app. We're on the radio too. Change is often messy, but gentrification is more than change. It means that people who have lived in neighborhoods for generations can be displaced, pushed out. Here's a definition of gentrification from a recent book. Gentrification is a particular kind of revitalization, targeting small areas or neighborhoods, and characterized by both an influx of new investment and an inflow of new people, typically of higher education and income levels than the original residents. Those who benefit from gentrification are primarily outsiders and homeowners rather than incumbent renters. Well, we'll ground truth that definition with our guests this hour, but what's not up for discussion is this fact. It's not unusual for Bay Area cities to occupy the top 3 places in lists of most expensive cities in the U.S. That's in part because of the relentless pressure here to house newly minted IPO millionaires and high-salary workers. In the next hour, we'll focus on what we can do in response to these realities. For example, there's Senate Bill 50. This bill, now on hold until 2020, aims to create the legal framework for thousands of housing units to be built near transit, often in places where apartments weren't welcomed and whether or not local governments are on board. One significant part of SB 50 is the creative and explicit language to prevent the rampant displacement that has followed development in the Bay Area for decades. The bill aims to define and identify sensitive communities. These sensitive communities are exempt from immediate transit-oriented development, so they have a chance to adapt to the inevitable changes that would follow development. That provision may sunset in 5 years unless it's still needed. The sensitive communities in question are those segregated by poverty or race. There are several markers that define those areas. When I asked SB 50's author, Scott Wiener, just 2 days ago whether protections for sensitive communities and other rental controls will remain in the final bill, he was unequivocal. Absolutely, he said. The sensitive community protections and the tenant anti-demolition protections are very important parts of this legislation. I'm very committed to them. And on the sensitive communities piece, we've made a lot of progress, and I really feel good about it. And we are definitely committed to keeping that in the bill. Well, we'll be digging more deeply into SB 50 with some of our guests later this hour. But before we continue, I'd like to introduce you to Kaya Kramer at our social media desk. She'll let you know how you can get in touch with us during the broadcast to ask your questions. Hi, Kaya.
Hey, Steve, and thanks everybody for coming out and listening today. We are here on Connect the Bay, and my name is Kaya Kramer, and we're talking about gentrification. We're talking about affordable housing. We're talking about what it means to be a Bay Area resident. I'm a Californian and somebody who has experienced what it means to be looking for affordable housing in California, in the Bay Area, somebody who's struggling, somebody who knows what it's like to go to school. So if you have any questions for us, like myself, somebody who has lived here and understands what it's like, give us a call, 1-800-287-2722. If you have questions, you don't want to call us, shoot us an email, connectthebay@norcalpublicmedia.org. And again, I'm sitting here at the social media desk at KRCB, and we're taking in your questions via social media. Message us on Facebook, find us on Twitter, find us on Instagram. Again, we're so pleased to be fielding these questions today. Again, this is Kaya Kramer on Connect the Bay.
All right, thanks, Kaya. You know, we love the moments when it feels like the universe is working with us to write our news programs. For example, It's just halfway through 2019, but already the New York Times has picked the best films of the year so far, and near the top of that list, The Last Black Man in San Francisco. It's a visual poem with elements of surreal comedy. It's also a wrenching condemnation of gentrification. Among the stars are Jimmy Fails, the co-creator of the film, Jonathan Majors, who plays his best friend, and one of San Francisco's most famous residents, Danny Glover. I can't think of a better introduction to our subject than this trailer for the film.
We built these ships, dredged these canals, in the San Francisco they never knew existed. This is our home. You two stick together.
I always come back to the old house. What if it's empty? What if we just peeked inside?
We could throw parties. You could put on one of your plays. We could yell.
What is this house?
Our old house.
That's not your old house and that's not your neighborhood.
Hey, if you're going to San Francisco, be sure to wear flowers in your hair.
Maybe he's right. What if we shouldn't be here?
Well, we should be here more.
Some millionaire?
To leave is not your loss. It's San Francisco.
I don't know how much longer we can keep doing this. But I'm not leaving. I'm the last one left. I'm with you, bro.
As I said, there are community members down in San Jose at the Community Media Hub, Create TV, watching Connect the Bay with you. Housing reporter Kyle Martin from our partner San Jose Spotlight is with them, and he'll be gathering questions from the crowd and sharing his own expertise with us. Hi, Kyle.
Hey, how you doing?
All right, Kyle, I hope you can hear me. How many folks are joining us down in San Jose today?
Yeah, a few dozen, I think. We got a good crowd in the room. I think I didn't get a good head count, but I'd say there's at least 30 people, probably more.
Great. That's great, Kyle. Now, I know we'll be talking later with a leader of one community organization, Somos Mayfair. So briefly, I had a question for you. How have some neighborhoods in San Jose been able to avoid being obliterated by housing demand from tech workers and others who have contributed so mightily to displacement in the region?
Sure. I think, in my experience talking to people throughout San Jose, and I think if you even ask anybody in San Jose that question, maybe you might hear that no neighborhoods have been able to escape gentrification, no neighborhoods have been able to not be affected by incoming tech workers, incoming, corporations, jobs that, that are here now. And I think another thing you'll hear is that people care about that. People care to hear about it, but not everybody knows how to address it. Not everybody knows how to talk about it. Not everybody knows, who's behind it necessarily.
Okay, Kyle, thank you so much, and we'll be coming back to you later in San Jose for more questions. But right now, we're going to watch a story about gentrification in Oakland. Our guide has deep connections to the city and has experienced the challenges of displacement there. Here's our story from Oakland, and we were so glad to be able to visit with community members down in Oakland. Here it is. We're going to have it in just a second. Thanks. Here we go.
We're standing in front of my old house, my mother's old house, at least where I grew up.
most of my teenage and adult life. This was a rough neighborhood back then. Don't get me wrong, it was rough. But there were parents raising their children as best they could in conditions that were not best as it could be. And all these houses here were owned by families, African American families. And there were children playing in the streets. We used to have races in the street to see who's fastest around the block. There was the Black Muslims up the street here. There was the Black Panthers spot around the corner. So in the midst of all that, we grew up. Now, you see it's a quiet street, no kids playing. The factory has been torn down. More than likely, there are going to be condos that get built here. And so the sad thing about it is we were squeezed out once, and we, families, African American families in Oakland, squeezed out once, and was being squeezed out again.
During the recovery, since the recession, home prices, home valuations, and rents in the Bay Area have gone up by large numbers, large percentage increases year after year. At the same time, there's been a lot of demographic change. So we've seen since 2010, we believe, a lot of African Americans, Latinos, and Asians moving from places like West Oakland and East Oakland and Bayview Hunters Point and the Richmond Triangle to the peripheries of the regions, places like Vallejo, Antioch, Stockton, and also out of the Bay Area, past the Altamont Pass, to San Juan and other places like that. A lot of the reason we believe that's occurring is because of this correlation between rent increases and home value increases, that people can just no longer afford to rent and are displaced out of their long-term communities and homes.
The neighborhood was changing, and it happened subtly. You know what I mean? Those houses come up, the BART came in, the post office came in, and then right after that, there was a track of new homes on that side, just a track. And everybody went, yeah. But see, that's how it starts, and then same thing happened in other parts of Oakland, and then in Lake Merritt became unaffordable, and then pretty soon you could not find rent that was affordable in Oakland. That's why I have a passion for this fight. One, because I want my daughter to afford a home one day. I wish I could afford a home one day. And so, yeah, I gotta be in this fight. If not me, then who? If not now, then when? So that's my motto. I just keep at it.
Okay, Gloria Bruce is now joining us from San Jose. She's Executive Director of East Bay Housing Organizations, and she has more than 15 years of experience in social justice and community development in her native Washington, D.C., as well as Boston and the Bay Area. Welcome, Gloria.
Thank you, Steve.
Oh, this story that we just saw about Oakland, is that a common story in Oakland?
Unfortunately, Steve, it is a very common story in Oakland, more and more so, as it is all over the Bay Area. And I think what we see in the East Bay is when you start to see the same stories over and over again, different people, different circumstances, we know that something is really going on as a huge phenomenon with a lot of people being displaced, sometimes to other cities and sometimes out of homes altogether.
Okay, now what does your organization specifically try to do to make sure that people don't continue to be displaced in ways that are worse and worse?
Yes, well, what my organization, East Bay Housing Organizations, has been doing for 35 years is really trying to change the laws, get more funding, and most importantly, change hearts and minds and build the public will to create more affordable housing, protect people in their homes, and preserve the affordable housing that we already have. So we're all about establishing housing as a right and something that everybody should have, and making sure that our laws and our city plans and our public funding and our employers and everyone else are united to push for that goal.
All right, Gloria, now your organization, I know, was involved in helping to form SB 50 with Scott Wiener. Can you tell me the kinds of input you had on that bill?
My organization was one of many that consulted with Senator Wiener's office, and we really wanted to make sure that it's important to build more housing in places that have traditionally kept it out, but that we also really wanted to make sure that people were protected in places like Oakland, San Francisco, San Jose, where unfortunately, as we see more market rate buildings getting built, we see more and more people struggling to get by being pushed out. And so it was critical that we don't just build housing, and we do need to build housing, but that we also make sure we're protecting those sensitive communities and communities of color at the same time.
Now, do you take Scott Wiener at his word that he's going to be sure to make sure sensitive communities are in the bill as it gets discussed more in 2020?
Well, you know, I certainly hope to, and anything can happen in politics and in Sacramento, as we all know. But I can say that certainly the group of advocates, my organization included, that have been working with his office are going to continue to hold him accountable and make sure that the state sees that, yes, we need to build on the one hand, but we absolutely have to protect people on the other.
All right, Gloria, I'm going to count on you to come back later in the show and to help us sum up. So thanks so much for joining us from San Jose. And Kaya, I think some questions have come in for us. Tell me what people are saying on social media about the show so far.
Yes, Steve. Again, this is Kaya Kramer here at the social media desk on Connect the Bay at NorCal Public Media. And Sarah Ortiz comes in and brings us a powerful question here from Santa Rosa. How can we support communities without gentrification? And what are your suggestions for people who want to move into the area, but because of affordability or because they like the community, but don't want to add to the gentrification problem? These are some powerful questions for those who have a desire to move into the area, for those of us who are in Northern California, for those of us who are in the San Francisco Bay Area, who wants to live here. It's a beautiful area, and I can't blame them. I've lived here my entire life. I've gone to school here. I understand what it's like. So if you too have questions for us just like this, feel free to give us a call, 1-800-287-2722. Again, we're answering questions here at the social media desk. Feel free to email us, connectthebay@norcalpublicmedia.org. And we're also on social media, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, @NorCal Public Media. Just because we are struggling right now to figure out where people can go, what people can do, and what resources are available for us in regards to gentrification in Northern California and the San Francisco Bay Area. We're answering questions, we're asking questions, and for those of us here whom are trying to bring more understanding, for those of us who love this area, we're just finding solutions. Again, this is Kaya Kramer at the social media desk for Connect the Bay.
Thanks so much, Kaya. And I really love that question about how people can be sensitive as they move from place to place, that they're not adding to the problem of gentrification. So first, before we go on to answer more questions, I want to give a little update about housing in California and the Bay Area. Recently, 1 billion seems to be the number of the month to get people's attention and to announce seriousness. Earlier this month, Google pledged $1 billion to help solve the housing problems that they helped create in Silicon Valley. According to the New York Times, Google estimates that its investment could spur the construction of 20,000 homes. And in a blog post, Google CEO Sundar Pichai specifically said he was trying to help, quote, long-time middle and low-income residents near Google headquarters. So he's saying implicitly that he's pledging the company's money to help fight gentrification. Now, while we're talking about billions, just last week, California Governor Gavin Newsom signed his first budget, including $1 billion to fight homelessness and $1.7 billion to support increased housing production. And in a new initiative, the governor threatened cities that don't plan for increased housing with fines up to $600,000. So we're going to check in with our guests to see if these funds can help beleaguered Bay Area residents fight displacement. But first, I'd like to shift the discussion back to San Jose, where Hanson Halm is standing by. Hanson is a planning consultant. He's a former assistant city manager and community development director for the city of Sunnyvale. And he has also worked in development in East Palo Alto and San Jose. Welcome, Hanson. Hi.
Thank you.
Hanson, it's great to see
Thank you.
And I know when we talked
Thank you very much.
several months ago about this subject, you mentioned that the first $1 million home in East Palo Alto had happened and how that was a psychological marker for you and the community. Can you tell us that story?
Yes, certainly. East Palo Alto, for those who are not familiar, for many years it was a community that was pretty much a very low-income African-American community that was basically a segregated community through a lot of city policies. It did incorporate in the 80s, and it has experienced significant gentrification in the last couple of decades, such that the majority of African-American citizens have now moved out of the city. It's a primarily Latino community, but now is experiencing another wave of gentrification. And it was pretty astounding when people know the history of East Palo Alto that the median price home surpassed $1 million recently. But comparatively, the median price home in East Palo Alto, I believe, is about $3 million, which is of not East Palo Alto, the adjacent community.
Wow.
So it kind of reflects the overall probably housing crisis and housing needs in the Silicon Valley area.
Well, thanks, Hanson. Now, let's talk about Governor Newsom and his billions of dollars. Will those billions that we saw earmarked last week for housing in the next budget, will that make a dent in what's needed in terms of housing production? And also, will it help fight displacement in sensitive communities?
Well, certainly the financial commitment to housing has always been critical. Working in the public sector, I know there's been a lot of focus on local communities, what they can do. I think the bottom line solution is a financial one. You need the influx of the money to incentivize the production of housing. As far as displacement, however, I think that requires some really keen policies to ensure, like what SB 50 is trying to do, is ensure that with the new investment of housing, there needs to be an adequate response to displacement and gentrification from the new housing that's being financed.
Okay, now, Hanson, that new housing is specifically meant to be around transit corridors. And that's the fear, I think, of many people in many communities throughout the Bay Area. There's going to be fast buses, there's going to be better transportation, the thing that people in these communities have been asking for years, if not decades. And once that happens, the people have the fear that they're going to be pushed out of the very communities that they made meaningful and where their neighbors are.
I think that's a very valid fear. Back when the first sustainable community strategy was developed by the ABAG and MTC, that was a key concern, that where the focus of the housing is occurring at transit locations, which is very appropriate, also coincides with where a lot of low-income neighborhoods are located or in the surrounding areas. And there was quite a bit of focus on the potential impact of the new housing as much as is needed. As for smart growth, it would have an adverse impact on these lower income communities. And unfortunately, with the shortage of housing, it's been dramatized even more in the last 5 years or so.
Well, Hanson, thanks so much, and thanks for your commitment to helping me get an education on this subject. I really appreciate it. Now we're back up in Santa Rosa for a story about the southwest quadrant of town, specifically the Roseland neighborhood, where development plans have just been approved for housing and for a community library and a hub, all this happening on Sebastopol Road, around the site of a Dollar Tree store. The development will be on 7.5 acres. It'll feature up to 175 apartments, 100 market rate, 75 restricted to low-income tenants. But will the development bring gentrification? And what does the community think? Let's watch that story now, as told by its residents.
I'm Ricardo Ibarra, editor of bilingual newspaper La Prensa Sonoma. It's Cinco de Mayo in the Roseland neighborhood of Santa Rosa. Cinco de Mayo commemorates the Mexican Army's defeat of the French Army at the Battle of Puebla in 1862. The unincorporated Roseland neighborhood was annexed by the city of Santa Rosa in 2017. I'm talking to community members today about how they see the neighborhood changing. Marcos J. Suarez of the Sonoma County Economic Development Board is the first person I meet.
Been a lot of talk about gentrification happening in this community in Roseland. Are you aware of that? Is there anything that you've heard about this issue?
Well, definitely there is. Whenever you have economic development, there's always, like in San Francisco in the Mission District, gentrification always happens, right? So there is that fear in the community that, oh, now there's going to be gentrification. Gentrification obviously is not a good thing. We want to keep our community here. And so for us at the Economic Development Board, one of the things that we've been doing is working with the MidPen, who's affordable housing, and together with the county and the city to look at how do we work primarily with the businesses that are here already in Roseland and people in the community that may want to start a business and keep it local.
The proposed Roseland Village project would build a mix of affordable and market-rate housing in this area. Nancy Calderon is a community leader and coordinator of Mitote, an outdoor Mexican food court that will open here this summer. She says maintaining a strong and vibrant cultural identity is essential in these times.
Do you consider yourself Mexicana, Latina, Mexican American? How do you identify yourself?
Bueno, I'm Mexicana, and I say this because I was born in Mexico and I was brought here at 6 months. So I'm maybe Mexican American because I'm also a citizen here as well.
What do you think of the ways that Latinos and Mexican are represented in the United States?
Well, right now it's pretty tough. I feel like more now than ever, we have to be united and work together.
Many families already find it hard to afford living here.
People are forcing to move strangers into their homes so they could help them pay the mortgage, pay the rent. People are getting notices for them to move out of their place that they've been renting for many years because rents are just going extremely high. My heart is in Sonoma County, but I feel like we're being forced out of Sonoma County.
The 2017 wildfires exacerbated an already tight housing supply in the North Bay. Santa Rosa Junior College student and reigning Miss Latina wine country, Janelle Estupinan, grew up in this area.
So do you think that gentrification is already happening here in Roseland? You've mentioned that there've been better roads now. Do you think that it's happening in some way?
I think so. There's actually a street, I'm not sure what it's called, but they just made apartments there and they are very, very expensive. So it is happening. The rent is pretty high right now, so I just hope that it kind of settles down for us students that, you know, we want to find somewhere to live and it's just hard.
Not everyone fears gentrification. Octavio Diaz, who will operate the Mitote Food Park, says attracting people from other areas will be good for business and will in turn create more local jobs.
I see us an opportunity for Roseland to grow in a more positive way. The roads need to get fixed, the schools need help, the people are really hungry to educate their kids. And I'm really excited because I want to be part of that and help our community. There's a lot of immigrant families that want to start their businesses and be successful, and I believe that the American dream is just that.
So you're not concerned about rents going up?
Well, everybody's concerned about everything, housing, rents, but that's why you have to participate in your communities. You have to be involved. You have to go to city meetings.
This is the one time out of the year that I get to wear this hat.
Nice.
Yeah, so I get to enjoy it and actually look like a charro, you could say.
You do, and then it matches.
That's why.
Officer Lopez says knowing neighbors and living close to family is important culturally.
I have to live somewhere to be able to work there and know it, to be able to build it up. If you're just coming in from the outside, you're not going to know the streets, you're not going to know your people, you're not going to know. And if those people are leaving also, then that's not going to work out and they have to leave somewhere else. So that's what makes the communities that you want generations. I want just how my mom came here and my dad, and yes, they were technically we're the first generation that we were here, but I want my children to live here and be established here and grow up where I grew up, and I want their children to do exactly the same thing. Yeah, but if it's getting too expensive, if they can't be here, they're going to have to go somewhere else, and that's going to be lost.
Now, joining me to talk about Roseland is the trustee of the Santa Rosa School Board who represents the area, Stephanie Manieri. At 23, she's already a prominent leader in her community. Stephanie, you appeared on a panel just a week ago talking about possible gentrification in Roseland. And I was so impressed by some of the things you said, especially the idea that the community is having a hard time making its voice heard. And you enumerated a couple of reasons why that was so. Can you remind me of those?
Sure, definitely. So the panel that you're referring to is the Los 100 monthly luncheon, and they had the opportunity for folks to come and talk about specifically Roseland and the Roseland Village. And so because I've been in the nonprofit world for a long time now, even though I'm only 23, I've focused a lot on community outreach and engagement. And so something as a resident of Roseland that I've noticed is difficult is to really have information, be informed about what's happening in the decision-making world, decisions that affect Roseland. And there are a couple of reasons for that. I know that in Roseland, there's quite a big fear of getting involved and being informed and going into spaces that maybe don't feel safe, and where a lot of these conversations are taking place.
Okay, so tell me what that fear is. Where do those fears come from?
Right, well, I think it's very layered, but the national political situation right now is causing a lot of fear in a lot of immigrant communities. In Roseland, we have a large immigrant community, and so that's really difficult for our families who might fear repercussions to their migratory status if they start speaking up or talking about the issue. So that's definitely one of them.
Now, do you think it's going to help with the idea that Roseland is going to be able to select its own city council person next year in 2020? Will that person be able to really take part in some of these discussions where people in Roseland have not been able to take part in the past?
Definitely, yes. And it's really exciting that we're going to have somebody finally at the table having a seat there in the world of politics and local politics. But it's really sad that we've been waiting so long for this opportunity, and we have to still wait another year until that person is elected into office. And there's just a lot of work to be done.
Now, in terms of the new housing that's being built on the fringes of Roseland, when we were watching that feature story, you were letting me know that you've heard that some of the rents there are just astronomical, not the kind of rents that people who are now in the community can afford. What else have you heard?
Well, so from personal experience, actually, my fiance and I have been looking into purchasing a home in Roseland because that's our community and that's where we want to stay and hopefully one day raise a family. And it's just completely unaffordable, and we are two educated working professionals, and we can't afford just for some of the homes, the cost of the home isn't too expensive, right? You can find in one particular development in the low 400s, but then there are added taxes and HOAs, and it gets really expensive.
Wow, so you're maybe not going to be able to stay in the community that you represent, that you and people, in your family and your neighbors have helped build. That must make you kind of sad.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, because we both definitely want to stay for the long term, and it's sometimes a daunting reality.
All right, Stephanie, can you hold here just for a second? And we're going to go down to San Jose, where we've been gathering questions down there, and perhaps you can answer one of the questions that Kyle Martin is going to be asking us from San Jose. So, Kyle, are you there with us now? Can you share with us one of the questions from San Jose?
Definitely. All right, one of the questions I got is, what can be done about San Jose's general plan? If you read the plan, it is to create 382,000 jobs and only 120,000 housing units, which will displace about 400,000 people. That's the question I got.
Okay, so this is a specific question about San Jose, but let's see if we can also make it apply to Santa Rosa as well. There's going to be tremendous development in Santa Rosa now. This is without a doubt, after the fires, development is happening. So what can be done to avoid displacement as money pours in, especially to Southwest Santa Rosa?
That's a really great question, and I think that the caller or whoever posed the question is really hitting on the mark, and that's that we're not having enough new development. While there is a lot of new development, it's definitely not enough. And so one of the things that I think we can really talk about and explore are maybe not rent control as we understand it, but different ways in which we can protect tenants and renters so that they aren't displaced. And our leaders, we really need to advocate for more equitable policies so that as resources are poured into the community, they're distributed equitably.
Okay, now another question I have is one that we were asked before that came in from our social media desk. And that was a question about how can people who would like to be allies, in a sense, people who are maybe not part of the community, if they say, we would like to invest in this community, we'd like to become part of the community, is there a way they can do that without the negative parts, without causing someone else to have to leave their own community?
I really think that that's a possibility. I think that, you know, even myself, as I'm trying to find a home, I kind of put myself in that bucket as well. And I think that as long as we are advocating for those who are long-term residents of the community, making sure that they have the protections that they need, and really supporting the community in any way that we can make a really big difference.
All right, now, Stephanie, are there any folks in the community right now who have said that they might be interested in that city council seat? And of course, I'm trying not to ask you, but I wonder if you yourself might be one of those people who might be running for city council.
No, no, I am not. I think that there will be some really good candidates that hopefully will announce soon. Because I have heard about a couple of people, but I don't see myself running for that seat.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us and for all the work you do. At the age of 23, I think you've already accomplished quite a lot, and we're looking toward the new leaders in Roseland and elsewhere in Santa Rosa to really make a difference. So thanks, Stephanie.
Thank you.
All right. Now, we have another guest in San Jose right now. Victor Vasquez is organizing manager at the community group Somos Mayfair. Now, we heard a little bit about East San Jose, where Mayfair is, from Kyle Martin earlier. And I'd like to go to you now, Victor, to tell us more about your community. You're an organizer in Mayfair. Why is that community at risk right now of gentrification, potentially displacing community members who might have a real commitment to the neighborhood? Thanks for joining us, Victor, in San Jose.
Well, thank you for having us. So for us, I think we have to look at the historical reasons, right? We are in a continent that has been suffering colonization and displacement for hundreds of years, and we've seen the impact of federal policies from the U.S. government to make sure that our organizations and families cannot own any place to live. So Mayfair is actually a community created out of segregation and redlining. And today we're seeing those impacts of our community members not being able to own homes. We're seeing how BART and transportation is also pulling, displacement to the area. And of course, all the tech companies that are coming to San Jose. So East San Jose in particular is a major place of displacement through maps, through studies, and through lived experience. You could see that.
Okay, Victor, now, as an organizer, can you let us in sort of behind the scenes? What do you do to help find members of the community who are willing to make a commitment to work with you and to stop some of the displacement and to add political power so that maybe the displacement can be ameliorated?
Well, the first thing that we do at Somos Mayfair is to identify those leaders who are impacted by every issue. We go out in our community and door knock. We provide the resources that they need to stabilize themselves so they can become those leaders in the community. And we do a lot of political education. So a lot of the history that you heard or the analysis that you see, we do it with our community members. And we organize bi-monthly meetings to make sure that our residents have the tools that they need to advocate for themselves. So for example, there's different events happening in the community, from planning feedback sessions to city meetings. And our job is to make sure that our community residents know this is happening so they can mobilize themselves in the process, create their demands, and state what they need, because it's really the residents who make the change.
All right. Does San Jose do a good job in terms of language? Is every single meeting translated so that people who speak Spanish, people who maybe speak some of the other languages of Mexico and elsewhere can always understand what's going on? Tell me if they're doing a good job, a good enough job as far as you're concerned.
Well, as far as I'm concerned, I believe that a lot of times our institutions do not do that. They do not have those translation ready. They don't have access to any of the forms that people need in order for them to qualify for public housing ready. But in our organizing, I know that a lot of our coalitions, like the Renters' Rights Coalition, every organization that's doing this work understands the importance of translation and access. And that's what's made San Jose successful, that we have people who are working at every level, and we're working together and solving this displacement crisis. So like I mentioned, the Renters' Rights Coalition was crucial in making sure that displacement was slowed down through rent control.
Okay, and Victor, I really want to thank you. Also, you've brought some member of your coalition to be with us in a few minutes. So in a few minutes, we'll come back down to San Jose, and we'll be talking with Olivia Ortiz, who's also a community member of Somos Mayfair. But now, joining me in Santa Rosa, we have Edgar Avila. Edgar is also a friend and a colleague. He works at KBBF Bilingual Radio in Santa Rosa. And part of the reason for this program is that I've been discussing these issues with Edgar over the past year. He made me aware of the fears of residents in Roseland and elsewhere in Santa Rosa, that they're going to be improved out of their homes. But when we started discussing this, Edgar, you cautioned me that if we were just looking at the community level and at the granular level, we might be missing some of the big picture. So I brought you on, and I know we only have a few minutes, to tell me, what is the big picture?
I think it's really important, everything that everyone's been talking about. Something that I haven't heard much talk about in this situation is the fact that gentrification is inevitable insofar as economic growth is always the goal. If economic growth is the source of our well-being, is the way that we can survive as a society, it's impossible for the economy not to push people out to bring others in. And when you think about the common narratives of gentrification, one might be, in Oakland, the big one is middle-class young people came to Oakland for whatever needs they had. And that changed the culture. The companies, property owners took advantage of that cultural change. What are those young people to do? Somebody asked a question earlier, what would you do if you want to move to an area without gentrifying? It's impossible. If you're a young person and tuition costs are going up, rent, apartment costs are impossible, you're going to move somewhere cheaper. And there's a certain extent to which you could slow that down, but insofar as the economy has to keep growing, it's impossible for that not to happen.
Let me see if I'm getting you and understanding you. So Oakland was, in a sense, a community where, as you say, younger, middle-class, white kids were able to move in after they graduated Berkeley or whatever. Mm-hmm. Now those younger, middle-class, white kids who pushed out the members of the black community, and some of them are now being replaced by some of the tech folks, exactly. The engineers, the people who are the IPO people, and people who are making a lot more money. And so the economy, as you suggest, is relentlessly moving people away from their own communities and into the far corners of the Bay Area.
If you could imagine a corporation that needs to lay off people, that needs to cut corners, and it's the saying in activism is always, you can always cut labor. It's the same model. You can always cut the most vulnerable people. And as if economic growth is always going to be the goal, then there's always going to be somebody who needs to be left behind.
Now, how do you translate these sorts of things to your audience that you talk to in Spanish in KBBF? What are some of the ways that you are trying to get this message out to them?
Well, it's actually not harder to understand, it's easier to understand when you can see it in everyday life, every time you leave your house.
Okay. Kaya, do we have a question that we can have for Edgar now?
Absolutely. Kaya here at the social media desk here on Connect the Bay. Again, if you too have a question for Edgar or any one of our guests here, feel free to give us a call, 1-800-287-2722. Email us, connectthebay@norcalpublicmedia.org. and of course through social media. We've got a very powerful question here about what Edgar is talking about in terms of the narrative of gentrification. Camelia Patino from Sebastopol writes in, thinking about gentrification, I think about story of place. How, when developing our land and our communities, do we articulate the story of who we are, where we live? How do we define the meaning and the values that we collectively create? This is something that we as Californians, we as part of the San Francisco Bay Area, and those of us who are trying to just make our lives, live through, go to school, get a job, and continue to thrive in an area where we've shared our story, living our lives together, is a very powerful question. Is this an inevitability? Are we going to be able to continue the story of who we are? Again, this is Kaya Kramer here at the social media desk at Northern California Public Media. Give us a call, 1-800-287-2722. Thanks so much.
All right, Edgar, briefly, talk about the story of place. How does that fit in with some of the things you were just telling me?
I think it's a really interesting question in the sense that if you think about it, everything that's communal, everything that's cultural, everything that's part of the community is bad for business. If you think about I kind of lived through a lot of my friends dealing with this stuff, and so as a younger person, this is kind of where I stick. And so, if for example here in Santa Rosa, if the priority is economic growth, and the priority to do that is, let's say, wine tourism, for example, it could be other things. If the priority is not providing cultural experiences for young people, which I think everyone can agree it's not, then those young people have to go somewhere, and they're going to go, for example, to Oakland, or they're going to go somewhere else. It seems like everything that we need in our communities to thrive is ultimately bad for business, and it ultimately seems to be the opposite goal of property owners and renters. Okay,
Edgar, thanks for bringing us your unique perspective, and I really count on that. And again, thanks for having these conversations with me over the past year.
Thanks.
We're returning now to San Jose, and we have a community member there from the Mayfair neighborhood standing by. Olivia Ortiz is a very important part of Somos Mayfair, and I really want to thank you for joining us today.
Oh, thank you.
All right, Olivia. Now, I'd like to ask you the same question about place. Must a community define itself as a place to be preserved and protected? And is that the kind of thing you do when you work with people in your neighborhood to stop gentrification and displacement?
Yes, definitely.
All right, tell me about some of the strategies that you might use.
Well, right now we are working on a local preference policy. I'm from a group that's called Vecinos Activos from Somos Mayfair. And our community has been working on this local preference policy.
Okay.
It's mostly about affordable housing.
All right, I like that idea. I like those two words. We haven't talked about that before. Local preference. So is that the idea that in a neighborhood, local preference would mean that if there's affordable housing built, the people who live there already, what we called earlier on the incumbents who are getting forced out, the people who live in the neighborhood would be the first in line to be able to live in affordable housing?
Yes, that's what we're asking, at least have 50% of those affordable housing units be for people that live within their district.
Okay, how long have you lived in San Jose and in the Mayfair area?
I've lived there for 12 years.
Wow, and in the 12 years, have you seen lots of changes?
Lots of changes, especially with our community. There's people moving to different cities, moving out, getting pushed out. Yeah.
I'd like to hear more about that. Tell me about some friends of yours who are being forced to be pushed out of the area.
Unfortunately, I've known a lot of them. I know that we just have an event last Friday. I'm sorry. There's two moms that they were talking about how they got pushed out, and then how much she misses our community. She she says that the community that she moved over there, she doesn't know anyone. She doesn't feel like she belongs over there. That this is her community to her. She misses it. She wants to come back.
That's very sad. It sounds like a kind of an event where a lot of tears might have been shed.
A lot of tears. You know what? The sad part is the one that get hurt the most is the kids, because they have to find different schools. They have to. They just, it's traumatic for them because they have to find a new school, new friends, and it's a big change for them. It's really sad. It's really sad.
Well, Olivia, I hope that you and the community are able to make some of the changes that are necessary, including this local preference idea. I really like that, and I hope that's part of your discussion in San Jose when the show is over. All right, Kaya, will the discussion continue here and in social media when the show's over?
Absolutely, Steve. The conversation here on Connect the Bay will always continue. If you have questions and want to continue putting your voice out there, feel free to give us a call, 1-800-287-2722. Email us, connectthebay@norcalpublicmedia.org. And of course, through Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. This is something that goes beyond this show. This is something that goes beyond just this moment right here. We're taking in questions now. And one of the most powerful questions that we've just gotten in from William Goodwin is, with so many companies from manufacturing to groceries, following suit and adopting the business model of the future, where home delivery services are essential, when will our local and federal governments adopt the same business model and make housing the top priority? Shouldn't businesses be pushing for more affordable housing as well, is a question he's asking. And because more housing means more delivery opportunities. This is a question that came in to us here on Connect the Bay. And so if you too have questions like William here and are concerned about what local government's role is, what our community's role is, and what you can do to be a part of that, again, connect with us here. Here on Connect the Bay, we're talking about this pivotal subject, gentrification, what it means to be somebody who is seeking affordable housing in this community. Again, this is Kaya Kramer here, and we are finding solutions. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you so much, Kaya. And we're going to be going back down to San Jose, and we'll be wrapping up with Gloria Bruce, who we talked to earlier in the hour. And Gloria, that's really fascinating. Of course, perhaps you remember that William Goodwin is the fellow that we talked with earlier on in our taped piece about Oakland, and the fellow who'd been pushed out of Oakland and had to move all the way to Pittsburgh. And we've talked about so many things. We've talked about redlining, we've talked about local preference. I'd like you to help us now to really get down to solutions and ideas about what can be done in the future. So Gloria, where are we at right now? And what do you think people have learned? Where do you think we might be able to move in terms of action after people finish watching our show today?
Sure, Steve. Thanks for the question. And we've heard a lot in the past hour. Lots of different stories from Roseland, from West Oakland, from San Jose, from Mayfair. And there are a lot of different ideas for addressing this housing and gentrification crisis that we're in. But I think most of us can agree that people should be able to have a safe, affordable, stable home. They should be able to live where they work near where they live, raise their family in a healthy home, and that they should be able to do that in a place where they have roots. And I think that's really what's most important. Is most of the people that we talk to in the East Bay, they welcome new neighbors and they welcome investment, but the key is investment without displacement. So how do we continue to make the Bay a place for old and new neighbors to live here together? And I think there are a lot of different solutions. And one is, as we were hearing from Roseland earlier, that affected communities have to be at the table and part of the solution. So city council members, businesses, people up in Sacramento need to be listening to these communities with these brown and black folks who are the ones to feel this first. And let's be clear, people in West Oakland, people in Mayfair and Roseland, they have been here through years of their communities not being thought to have value through the outside world. And they always knew these communities have value. So we need to listen to them first. SB 50 is just one of many bills moving through the Senate and the Assembly right now. We also really need to pay attention to tenant protection bills like 1482. We need to make our cities use their public land better. So all of these things are things that we need to do together. So just tell your city council members we support affordable housing.
Thank you so much, Gloria. Thanks for helping us wrap this up. Now, an important part of what we're doing this evening is that all those in San Jose who have been watching the program at Create TV, you're about to take part in a discussion centered on solutions and strategies for increasing affordable housing and avoiding the gentrification that leads to displacement. We're going to be filming this discussion and we'll share it on our website. And that's all for this edition of Connect the Bay. As we've been preparing the program, we've noticed a near daily drumbeat of news and commentary about the changing Bay Area and how displacement continues to push middle class and lower income people out of our city centers and out to the corners of our region. Let's keep talking about this together. When I spoke with Scott Wiener about Senate Bill 50 just 2 days ago, I felt I had to ask him, why is this an issue that you're passionate about? And here's what he told me. Having lived in San Francisco for 22 years, seeing our housing situation go from problematic to bad to terrible to falling off the cliff, and having witnessed the human carnage of this housing shortage, with people getting evicted, people being pushed to living in their cars or in homeless shelters, longtime residents having to leave the city or the state entirely, families that have a second kid and can no longer afford to make do, and so they leave. It's really damaging to a community to have this type of housing shortage. So, winners and losers, the powerful and the powerless. I hope you think about gentrification just a bit differently than you did an hour ago, and perhaps you fear, as we do, that The Last Black Man in San Francisco is not merely a movie title, but an elegant warning that must be heeded before the Bay Area loses the charm and character that makes it a beacon for America and for the world. So, from all of us here at Northern California Public Media, thanks so much for joining us tonight. I'm your host, Steve Mencher.